My name is Denise Luscombe. I'm Chair of PRACY, so Professionals and Researchers in Early Childhood Intervention, and I'm here on Wajak Noongar Boodja in WA. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the lands where you're joining us from today. I pay my respects to elders, past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'd also like to just say thank you to Megan, Trish, and Chris, who will be assisting us with letting people into the webinar as well as supporting the chat today. It is terrific to see so many familiar people who registered from the consultations that myself and Kerry completed as part of the review of best practice in early childhood intervention that occurred online and around the country. But I can also see regular attenders and supporters of PRACY, so thank you again for joining us. I thought I would provide a brief update on the best practice project. So for those who attended the consultations, we have provided the consultation summary to DSS, and this will be available publicly in the near future. We're now moving on to the development of the practice framework itself, taking into consideration information from the desktop review, our consultations with professionals and organisations, the lived experience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families and other families, and importantly, young people aged 15 to 30 years old who had received early childhood intervention in Australia. For those who may not be aware, the framework is cross-sector, it's cross-discipline, cross-diagnosis and cross-service delivery model. And it's really for those working with children with developmental concerns, delays or disability, and their families and others involved in their life. So this project continues until April next year, and we will keep you updated on the development of the practice framework and the associated tools and resources through the project page on our website and our newsletter, PRACY Connect. So as we listen to professionals and organisations around the country, we heard clearly that there was a need to raise the profile of children themselves in the framework. And this included discussions around child voice, child agency, and child identity. And this led to reaching out to Kylie and Stephen to support this topic in a webinar. On another note, PRACY's also been involved in a consultation for developing the Voice of Children framework being completed by Griffith University. So this is an area of considerable interest across many sectors. So I think we have given people time to join. So let's get started. So I have the pleasure of introducing Kylie and Stephen, and you have access to their bios. So I'm just going to provide a brief summary. So Kylie is a psychologist with over 25 years of experience and a deep commitment to empowering children and families, advocating strongly for child agency. She recognises that children, regardless of age or communication styles, have the right and capacity to make meaningful choices. And Stephen, a speech pathologist by background, but has worked across many diverse roles throughout his career with the common thread of sharing his knowledge with children, families, educators, equality's sake, championing quality services to children with disabilities and their families for over 20 years. And I first met Stephen in Chattanooga, Tennessee, when we both participated in an RBI certification institute with Robin McWilliam many years ago. And it has been wonderful to see how our paths continue to cross. And it was wonderful to meet Kylie during the consultations for the framework and hear her input and wisdom around this area. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them about such a critical topic, which is child agency, increasing the impact of work with children and families to support long-term outcomes. So thank you very much, Kylie and Stephen. If you would like to come onto screen, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Denise. So many pieces to pick up from in terms of your introduction. Likewise, it was an absolute pleasure to meet you just over a decade ago in Chattanooga, and have always been really grateful for your support that you've provided me. To get started, Yulma, I'm coming today from Ngunnawal country, and I'm really excited to be talking on this topic today. It's something that I'm really passionate about and have been really excited to see how we have taken this concept only a couple of years ago, and really looked at how we can support our staff at Noah's Ark to utilise practices that elevate the voice of children, but also ensure that children's perspectives and voices are heard through the process of working together as well. And hearing about what you were sharing before, Denise, around the consultations and the recognition that there's so many people in the sector right now who are wanting to learn about child agency and elevating the perspectives of children in their work. We're really excited to be talking to you today. I'm really fortunate to be co-presenting with Kylie. Kylie and I have worked together for a considerable amount of time, and Kylie is a real force when it comes to child agency. She has taken this concept of child agency and turned it from an idea into something that's really practical, along with a team of other people around her. But Kylie has absolutely been the driving force behind that as well. Today, we're going to share with you a little bit about what we've learned about child agency over the last couple of years, and why it's so essential to be included as part of the work that we're doing with children and families. We want to share with you a little bit about what we've learned, what we've tried, what's worked well, what we want to see further improvements in, and really share some of the experiences that we've had along the way, recognizing that there's a whole range of strategies and approaches that we've used as an organisation to successfully use a child agency as part of our everyday work as well. And then the final part of our presentation today will be around how we about how we are continuing to evolve this concept as well, and what we're learning along the way, and how we're approaching that as well. So yeah, really looking forward to the next hour. If you could jump into the chat and really quickly answer this question: who identifies the goals in your work? Who's responsible for setting the goals that you're working on? I'd love to see some responses in the chat around who it is that's identifying the goals in the work that you're doing at the moment. Yeah, great. Thanks. I'm hearing lots of responses about caregivers, families, NDIS participants, caregivers, the community, educators. As a practitioner in the field, lots of people talking about their own responsibility in terms of setting goals with children and families as well, and really thinking about how the variety of different of people that are involved in setting goals for children. And I'll talk a little bit more about how goals really impacted our thinking about child agency and really elevated the work that we were doing as well. So while you're in the chat, oh, my mouse seems to want to go backwards today, not forwards. I'd really like to know, and there's quite a few people who are indicating that children are part of the goal setting process. So we're curious to hear from you again. Drop it in the chat. What age should be consulted about goals, about the work that we're doing with them? What age do you think? Rachel coming straight out with the zero. That's wonderful to see. And lots of different people talking about lots of different ages, and recognition that different children are. That different children, and depending on their individual circumstances, what they when they think that it is the right time for them to be able to share their perspectives of what's going on for them. Thanks so much for sharing your perspectives as we get started today. And I'm going to hand over to Kylie to share a little bit more about what is child agency. Thanks, Kylie.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay. Loving some of those answers there. That was amazing to see that we've got a group of people that are really thinking about this and sharing some like minds here, I think, which is great. So just for some context, let's start with a bit of background. So what is child agency? We'll swap slides, Stephen, if we can. Great. Child agency is when we help kids to learn how to make choices. It's about giving them information about the things that matter to them and can affect their lives. It also means letting them share their opinions and eventually letting them be part of making decisions about the important things that involve them. So just like the range of other skills that children learn as they grow and develop, these decision-making skills also get better with time. Families and other adults in the child's life have a really important role in ensuring that the child has these opportunities and in helping them practice these skills so they can continue to develop. Swap slides, Stephen. So why is it important to us as therapists? Well, firstly, it's a human right. United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child states that children have the right to say what they think should happen when adults are making decisions that affect them and to have their opinions taken into account. The fundamental importance of child agency also comes through in a range of other frameworks and standards that intersect with our work. It's the first learning outcome identified in the early years learning framework, that children have a strong sense of identity. Having a strong sense of identity means having a clear understanding of who you are as a person, what you believe in, what matters to you. It also means being comfortable in your own skin, being able to assert your needs and values. In short, we're talking about child agency. The National Quality Standards for Early Childhood Education and Care expects that each child's agency is being promoted, enabling them to make choices and decisions and to influence the events in their world. So just being clear, we're talking about early education and care here. So this is children under 5 that we're talking about, not just for older children and young people. We're talking about all children. And a lot of you are already recognising that. And just the other one is the National Principles for Child Safe Standards, which were introduced in 2018, intended for all organisations working with children, with principle 2 identifying that children and young people are informed about their rights and participate in decisions that affect them and are taken seriously. So this is recognising that link between child safety and that it can be compromised in situations where children don't receive information and they don't have ways to raise their concerns. So it's pretty big. While it's crucial to prioritise child agency as a fundamental right, it's also important, I think, to remember that children actually grow up to become adults. And caregivers, teachers and therapists were often very focused on the immediate here and now challenges that are going on for the child. But we need to also be thinking about and fostering a child's capacity for independent decision making if we're recognising that this is a skill that they're actually going to need in adulthood. So these skills take time to develop, they take practice. So prioritising this early in a child's development is essential for future wellbeing. Now, we've probably all got children that we can think of that may likely require ongoing support in some or indeed many areas of their life when they become adults. But rather than this reducing the need for considering child agency, it actually makes it even more important. Cultivating their ability to actively take on a decision-making role can help to ensure better outcomes and a better quality of life and a life that they want. Thanks, Stephen. So what else do we know about this? Research in the area highlights that involving children helps them to build a broad range of skills. These skills may not always be the direct target of our work, but they're very important skills as children grow and develop. Self-esteem and feelings of mastery and control over the things around them are supported through experiences that support a child's growing agency as their confidence and skills and capacity to influence the world grows. A child's connection and relationship to important people around them can also be enhanced through the mutual understanding and active participation in decisions that are part of exploring different ideas and values and respecting these. Then we've got other skills such as problem solving, decision making, and independence, which are also supported and fostered through a child's involvement in discussions and the planning that takes place when working with others and being included in decisions. And the other thing that's really significant, given that our work is supporting child outcomes, is that it's been demonstrated repeatedly in the research that involving the child in our work leads to better outcomes. And that's demonstrated to be true both for goals that the child may have chosen for themselves, but also for the goals that the other have chosen. So it's a real win-win. When thinking about child agency, it's also really important to recognise some of the barriers that are at play. For all children, there are societal assumptions about a child's capacity to be involved. Frequently, children are viewed as less able than adults to make decisions, and instead that they should be shielded from information and challenges and need our support and protection. There's also well-recognised additional barriers for individuals with a disability, with frequently held views of them having greater limitations in their capacity to be involved in decision-making. This is true not only for children, but also for adults with a disability, and this is found to be especially true where an individual communicates in ways that are different from traditional speech, or where there are low expectations from people around that individual. Important to remember. So if we want children to participate, what do we need to do? So Lundy first proposed this model in 2007 and identified that for children to participate, the following areas need to be working well. So the space or the context needs to be a safe and inclusive one for the child to express their views. With space, it can also be important to consider time, and that children may need more time than adults to consider and explore different ideas. Voice, so this refers to children having the information to support them to express informed views. If you don't know about something, if you haven't been given information, this immediately places you at a disadvantage in discussions around a topic. So adults sharing information is essential to children having a voice. Influence, so this refers to the need of those in power around the child to take their views into account. So the message is getting to and being heard by someone who can have influence over the situation. And related to this is audience, which means that the child's communication is to someone with the responsibility to listen, and also that children are aware of who the audience is, who their thoughts and feelings are being shared with. Another framework that can be helpful in guiding our thinking around child agency is the levels of participation framework, which is described by Alderson and Montgomery. So this framework looks at the steps to building greater participation, starting with children being informed about what's happening, growing into them being able to express an informed view, and from this that their views have the capacity to influence the decision-making process. And then as they grow and develop, that they have the skills and confidence to ultimately make the majority decisions. While I'm really mindful now of working in ways that support child agency, I don't need to think back too far to recognise some children where the supports that were happening in my sessions would not even have addressed the first level of this model. Situations where all the information sharing, the planning and discussions happened instead with the caregivers. And I don't think I'm alone. The next model I just wanted to share is one from Plumtree Children's Services in Sydney, which has some really helpful ideas when we're thinking about this area. This model recognises that teaching children to recognise and use their voice is one of the important roles parents play, and tends to start with small familiar ideas, things like choosing a snack or what to wear, and getting increasingly complex as children get older. The model promotes coaching children from an early age in the art of making decisions and including them in the planning with professionals as soon as possible. As a child's understanding grows over the years, they become more confident and capable of taking control of their life's direction. Alongside of this, the model recognises the parent's role that gradually changes from coach to consultant. It's interesting to consider the progression for caregivers alongside their child. So with babies, parents often start by making all the decisions. But as they get to know their baby and how it communicates and hear their child's voice, what their child likes and what they don't like, they can start to use this information to involve them in decisions. They can begin to coach their child to learn and to use their skills, and over time, the support they provide is in line with their child's growing skills. With children with disabilities, as with typically developing children, as a parent sees a child being able to take on a greater role in decision-making, parents' confidence also tends to grow alongside of this. This relationship between child skills and parent confidence is something for us to have in mind in our work. It means that we may be able to support this process in a range of ways. We may be able to talk with parents about child agency and reflect with them on where their child's at, what skills are showing, how they might like to be supporting next steps. We can also be supporting this in our work with the child by supporting opportunities for the child to be involved and sharing decision-making. This provides some experience and practice for the child, supporting their skill development, and alongside of this, there's opportunities for the parent to possibly see other skills that their child's developing and reflect on where there may be opportunities for this to be practiced further or supported, both within visits or in other areas of the child's life. Now I'm just going to hand back to Stephen to talk a little bit about our child agency project at Noah's Ark, what we did, initial outcomes, and some of the learnings from that. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Kylie, and navigated my way across multiple screens without too much issue, which is always, living my best life today when I can do that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about the experiences that we've had at Noah's Ark so far in terms of child agency and what that's looked like over the last couple of years. So we originally started talking about the idea of child agency, and it really started to influence our thinking when we initiated a project back in 2022 that was really focused on improving the quality of the goals that we were writing. We could see that when we wrote really high quality goals, that this would have a really positive impact on the outcomes for children and families. And so we wanted to really dig into this and understand what is it that we need to be doing best to write really high quality goals. And one of the things that rose to the surface from the conversations that we were having at that point in time was that the quality goals included the voice of the child as part of the work that we were doing. As we started to implement practices around including the voice of the child in the goals that we were working on, we quickly recognised that we can't just ask children to come up with a goal if we aren't including their perspectives in all of the work that we're doing together. We can't expect them to come up with a goal if they're not informed about who we are and what we're doing together. So at that point in time, our focus shifted from including the voice of the child to building the capacity of children to be involved in making decisions that affect them, or child agency. We initiated a project to support this shift and ensure that child agency was a consistent and significant feature of our work with all children and families. We knew that staff delivering services to children and families were enthusiastic about child agency, that adopted the idea of child voice goals with gusto. But we also knew that providing them with the resources and support was going to be crucial for success. From some of the other projects that we had delivered around supporting the quality of practice at Noah's Ark, we knew that our resources need to be tiered. We needed to have a technical background paper that really delved into the details behind the research on what we were discussing and what we wanted to happen. And we wanted to have really practical child and family facing resources that practitioners could use in their everyday work. We developed a rollout plan that utilised the existing organisational support systems so that we had already tried and knew were successful in implementing behaviour change across the organisation as well. We knew that we needed to consider multiple levels of impact if we wanted to have positive outcomes for children and their families. We identified project outcomes that aim to benefit the child, their interactions with caregivers, and our staff as well. And while the project was focused on children, their agency, and their voice, we knew that we needed to keep caregiver outcomes on our radar as well. Knowing that children are deeply influenced by their family's culture, experience, and values. Our work on child voice goals had highlighted that there are often differences between what the child and the caregiver want out of their therapy support. Staff was telling us at that point in time that they were really unsure about how to navigate that tension. So we needed to develop a nuanced understanding of what is child agency and how that develops over time. And we needed to appreciate the perspectives and values of the adults in the child's life as well. So the Child Agency project commenced in May 2023, where we extended on our existing knowledge of what is child agency. We incorporated a period of planning and consultation to gather input from our reference group, develop the necessary resources, and create a comprehensive implementation plan. We launched our trial in November 2023, and this included an education package and providing access to the necessary resources that practitioners could use in their work with children and families. In March 2024, we plan to review our experiences and look at what are the necessary changes that we would need to make to support ongoing implementation as we progress further. Before we started the project, we conducted a survey of all staff delivering services to children and families. We had a 92% completion rate of staff who were delivering services to children and families completed the survey. Each question was scored on a 5-point Likert scale, and the results I'm reporting on today are an aggregate of the often and consistently responses from staff. So what we heard from our staff were that they were aware of what child agency is, but they really lacked the confidence to be discussing it in their work with children and families. While they had knowledge of child agency, they were also telling us that this was not being applied consistently in their everyday practice. Our staff were telling us that the children that they were working with were unaware of who they were and what they were there to do together, and which raised some concerns for us as well. The survey also highlighted that less than a third of staff were consistently sharing information with children during our sessions. So this lack of information is about who we are, what we're doing, and other information about the supports that we're providing was really hindering the children that we were supporting, their ability to make informed decisions. And we were also hearing from our staff that very few of them felt confident to discuss child agency and caregiver values with families. So then in March 2024, we reviewed our feedback from staff and wanted to learn more about what was the impact of the learning package and the resources that we'd shared with them already. What we'd heard from them was a few really interesting pieces. One of the most significant things was that children were becoming more aware of who we are and why we're involved. This was telling us that staff are talking directly with children about who they are and what we're doing together. We saw practitioners telling us that they were seeking feedback from children about their views and opinions in the work that they're doing together. And this was occurring much more consistently than ever before. We heard that staff were feeling like children's perspectives are being incorporated into goal setting and stakeholder discussions, such as meetings with schools and early childhood supports. We also were hearing that children are gaining a greater sense of agency and control over their own experiences of therapy supports, and that our work is becoming more child-focused and responsive to children's needs and preferences. Over the 4-month implementation period, staff reported a 25% increase in exploring child agency with caregivers and also identifying this as an ongoing discussion with families. Staff were telling us that they're becoming more proactive in discussing child agency with caregivers. child agency had become a consistent and ongoing discussion between practitioners, caregivers, and children. We were also hearing that this increased focus on child agency was demonstrating that the supports and resources that were being provided were helpful in addressing the tension between the child and the caregiver's perspectives. Staff told us about their experiences as well. They felt that they were better equipped with the resources that related to child agency and its application to their work. An overwhelming majority of staff were telling us that they felt that they understood what child agency is and how it relates to their everyday work. And while staff initially had a strong understanding of the theoretical aspects of child agency, the increased confidence that we were seeing over the initial implementation period was suggesting to us that they're now better able to apply their conceptual knowledge and apply it to their everyday practice. This strong understanding of the why, of the underlying reason of why we would be implementing and using child agency practices was crucial for effective implementation. So let me talk you through an example of how a practitioner was using the child agency tools in their work with children and families. All names in this case study have been changed for privacy and confidentiality reasons. So Christy, a speech pathologist, was working with Henry, a 6-year-old, a child with cerebral palsy. Christy reported feeling stuck with successfully implementing Henry's communication device. She felt she was tending to push for the device use, but wasn't feeling the family were as keen as what she was. She recognised that because the immediate family understood Henry's communication well, the device seemed like just an additional and unnecessary step at home. And as a speech pathologist myself, I've certainly been in that situation more than one time in my career. The family were reporting that they were rarely using the device, and when they did, it was more about them trying to teach Henry things rather than him using it as his voice. They also found that Henry would become frequently very excited or upset when they used it. He'd bury his face in his hands, throw things, and hit out at these times. As a result, the device wasn't really being used much at all. Christy recognised that she needed to think about a new approach. She identified the opportunity to use the device to promote Henry's developing independence and agency. She used the new child agency resources to explore the parents' view of Henry's involvement in therapy and growing independence. Since that time, the family's perspective on the device changed. They began to prioritise the device as a means of communication. And this was really sparked by the discussions that Christy was having with Henry and with the family. Now we're seeing lots of really positive outcomes for Henry and his family. He's now using his device to communicate with others and express himself. His favourite button is, "I have a story to tell." And that really resonates with me as well. The device has allowed him to respond to his peers and extended family using a mixture of the device and spoken words. The family used to feel a lot of what he was doing was babble, but are now seeing his use of the device as really intentional. Henry loves to talk about his dog and find out about other people's pets using his device as well. The new approach has also helped develop a more effective plan for responding to Henry's behaviours. The new approach when behaviours occur is for the adult to model, it looks like something's wrong on the device and navigate to the something's wrong page. This then allows Henry to point to the options like tired, I want something different, or I'm bored, which has really supported him to have a voice in those moments and for the adults to be able to respond quickly and helpfully. Christy feels that this collaborative partnership between herself, Henry, and his family has shifted towards a longer-term view of the goals that they're working on. This includes supporting Henry into the future as a competent and ultimately independent contributor to the important decisions that impact him. We've seen lots of positive shifts in terms of awareness and practice since the inception of this project. The data that we've just shared with you so far and other anecdotal reports indicate a growing awareness of child agency and its importance in our work. Practitioners, children, and caregivers have told us that having access to the variety of resources have helped them to utilise child agency practices in their work together. We're learning that effective implementation of child agency requires a combination of clinical skills, knowledge, and collaboration, that there's no one-size-fits-all to this approach. We are required to apply our technical knowledge to the individual strengths and needs of the child sitting in front of us, and the culture of the family and the community that they exist in. We're continuing to learn by monitoring long-term shifts and support ongoing implementation. We've heard lots of feedback from children, parents, and staff about the impact of child agency. For one parent, they told us that the child agency resource has been a revelation. For this family, one of their 6 children were actually accessing supports from us. However, this parent felt now that she wanted to use all of these ideas with all of her children moving forwards as well. Staff has told us lots of stories of success about how the child agency resources have been beneficial to them and the children and families that they're supporting. One practitioner told us that she'd been having discussions around diet with a young man with Prader-Willi syndrome, but never included him. This being despite the fact that it's a lifelong issue for him. For another practitioner who was involved in including the child in goal-setting conversations, she said that this child shared information that she wasn't aware of before. And for another practitioner, we heard that he's taking more ownership, that the child is taking more ownership for our work together and making his own goals. It's been really exciting to see the growing confidence of practitioners within the organisation to use these resources moving forwards. Kylie, I'm going to hand back to you to talk a little bit more about the strategies and approaches.
Perfect. Thanks, Stephen. All right. Next slide, thanks. So when we first start thinking about child agency, I think it's often easiest for us to think about this with older children or perhaps children where they can actively communicate with us. But I just wanted to highlight something that I know a lot of you already know, that this is about all children and it's something that we can do and be thinking about in all of our visits. So it will look different depending upon the child's age, their abilities, their interests, but all children can be involved and have their agency supported. And if we look at this picture in the slide here, just a still photo that we've pulled from the internet, I think you can see that even in this snapshot, we've got a young child who is sharing information about what they like and how they feel. We don't have to wait until a child is able to communicate with us in other ways. We can work to tune in to any child's voice, using what the child is telling us to inform and shape our work together and support their emerging skills. Thanks, Stephen. We're just going to pause the recording here for a short minute. Any comments in the chat, but we've got in here that being prepared and knowing what's going to happen is important. And I think learning being fun and the planning together was the other things that were really standing out to me. All right, so what does this look like in visits? So some practical ways that we can support child agency alongside of parents and caregivers is through having ongoing discussions about child agency and their child's involvement in sessions and decision-making to better understand the different perspectives. We can ensure we're sharing information with not just the adult, but with the child and in a way that makes sense to them. And I'd suggest that this includes sharing even simple information in situations where we think the child may not understand. We want to be asking for and listening to understand the child's ideas. Not all children are going to be able to share them in the same way as Hayden was just able to. For children that may not be able to tell us their thoughts as easily, this involves us working with the caregiver and using observation and other methods to gain the child's information about what's working and not working for them. When children are sharing with us, we want to ensure that it actually has impact and actually influences the way that we're working together. We want to give children options and meaningful, safe choices in our work together and help them to learn from mistakes rather than clearing the path of them, letting them fail safely, supporting understanding of the value of this. And we want to enter the child's world, seeing things from their perspective, and importantly, linking therapy to what is relevant and interests and motivates them. as Hayden said, who wants the boring stuff? We want to ensure that when we're building intervention and plans, and we do this in partnership with both the child and the caregiver to ensure it reflects individual needs. And this includes seeking the child's feedback and their input into goals. Thanks, Stephen. I'm sure many of you are already using lots of different tools and strategies to support children to participate in therapy. This might include the discussions you're having with them, sharing information and listening to them. It could be finding out about their interests. You might be using visuals to support their understanding, offering choices in your work, following the child's lead. I just wanted to touch briefly here on the increased understanding in recent years around both child agency and neurodiversity affirming approaches. With this in mind, I think it's important to mention that some of the approaches that we've used in the past may unintentionally work against a child's developing agency and their growing awareness of themselves. We therefore need to think critically about some of the approaches and strategies we use. Given what we know, are the approaches that we're using, are they still fully aligned with what we're aiming to achieve? I know there's certainly approaches that I've spent time and probably lots of money as well training in that I've now either binned or adjusted as a result of these new learnings. Some of the useful questions that I've found to ask are, is the tool or strategy aimed at supporting the child's participation, or is it just about their compliance? Is the intent of a visual to support the child's understanding or their communication, or is it merely a requirement for the child to work through to ensure that the goals are met? Placing a child agency lens over sessions and different approaches will help in identifying practices or approaches that may need some further thought if we're truly engaging children as active participants. Thanks, Stephen. So where are the opportunities in our work? When do we do this? We know children need lots of practice opportunities to develop agency skills, so it's great to know that there are opportunities in every part of our visit with every child in mind. When we have visits with children and caregivers, can we think about when we meet, who do we greet? How do we greet each person? Who's information shared with? Who is involved in decision-making about how we work, what we practice, how we practice it, how effective it is, and what we want to keep doing? Who sets the goals for our work? You might already be doing a lot in this area, or you might be doing this with some children and caregivers more than others. The challenge for all of us is to consider what else we can be doing and to be approaching this in a really intentional way if we recognise the impact that this actually has on long-term outcomes. There are also times where it can be really helpful to share specific information and resources around child agency to help build understanding. These discussions can come up at any time, but maybe particularly around transition points where a child is starting at daycare or school or transitioning to high school. Sometimes also, I guess we've found that it's a helpful concept to raise when things are feeling a bit stuck with competing agendas, where you or the caregiver reflect that the child could be taking a more active role in sessions, or where goals may seem at odds with the child's interests or motivations. These might be a time to take a step back and consider child agency and how that may support us in a way forward that's more in line with the long-term outcomes that the child and caregiver wants. And the example that Stephen shared with the communication device and the young boy is a really great example of that. When researchers have looked at goals for children, as Stephen said before, and compared these with adults, they're often different. Not surprising, probably. Children's goals are frequently more varied than caregivers. They tend to be more specific and functional, and often related to improving their participation in daily living and school tasks, interactions with peers and leisure activities, so belonging and being accepted by others. I think the good news is we actually don't have to choose. We can actually do both. Remembering what the research says about children being actively involved and the outcomes for all goals, theirs and those of the caregivers, are enhanced. At a practical level, though, working on both child and caregiver goals often requires good communication around the benefits of child agency and also developing that understanding of what this might look like for this individual child and family. Children's goals, like parent goals, sometimes need a bit of thought and consideration to identify a nice, clear goal and also to balance the needs and interests of the child and family. We had a great example that we talked about quite a lot of a young boy who identified to the therapist that was working with him that his goal was to be able to do a backflip out of a tree. So this kind of caused us to pause for a moment. But rather than shutting this idea down, the therapist explored this further with the boy and his family, and they were able to work to agree upon a goal that was in line with what the child was wanting, but also aligned to family values and also kept this child safe. Very important. The final goal was for the child to be able to learn to do a backflip on the ground because they had actually never done a backflip before. But this was something they could work on together and have really good success with. The therapist and the family also talked about the flow-on effects they saw. So they saw differences in the child's engagement in sessions, relationships, and confidence grow as a result of engaging him and working on something that was important and meaningful to him. The other question that we get that comes up a lot is, as we try and balance child and caregiver needs and goals, is what do we do when a caregiver has a goal for a child that the child's not interested in, or even where the child might seem upset or distressed by the goal that we're working on? What does this mean in the context of child agency? So while goals should always be to the benefit of the child, sometimes these benefits are only seen when we think about the medium or long-term outcomes. We sometimes talk a little bit here about non-negotiable goals. So these may be goals in the areas of hygiene, like brushing teeth, hair, toileting, that we know can sometimes be hard or upsetting for some of the children that we work with. There may be non-negotiable goals around medication that a child needs to take, again, that they find difficult, or around behaviours that may be causing harm to the child themselves or maybe are at risk for others around them. So while these goals may be challenging for the child to work on in the short term and are not goals that the child might choose, these are goals that are recognised by the caregiver as important for the long-term benefits of the child, their physical well-being, the rights of other people, and they need to be taken into consideration. I think the important thing to remember when we're thinking about non-negotiable goals or ones where the child may not be interested or motivated is while the goal might be non-negotiable, there are typically a range of different ways we can approach goals that are negotiable. And through this, we're able to work with the child, understanding their views, the impact this has on them, and their voice can absolutely influence the work that we're doing and work to reduce any negative impacts of the goal. Thanks, Stephen. So what about different views? And the next slide too. Yeah. When we're talking about child agency, it's actually pretty likely that we're going to have different views to people around us. Sometimes they might be slightly different. Sometimes they might be very different from one another. Firstly, we need to recognise the importance of relationships. Connection is required to be able to trust and share ideas. Also helpful to remember that our role is one of sharing information and not of convincing the other person to see things in the same way as us. A coaching approach is really helpful here, where we can explore what the other person knows, share some information, and then ask some questions and reflect on what the person thinks about what we've shared. When sharing information, we want to ensure this is a two-way discussion and not just us sharing our views. This is because finding the best way forward is not just about the information we think is important, but also about what the caregiver already knows, what they believe, and including this, what barriers there may be. If this is a new area, they may be interested to seek some more information, and we can think about how they like to access information and support them where possible. Also important to go slow. If you're like me, it can be helpful to be on the lookout for your own passion and ideas, and that may be driving the conversation, but we want to go at a pace that's aligned with what the caregiver needs and reflects what they're needing. In most situations, conversations take time, and usually it's multiple conversations, not a single one. We need to remember our role as one of sharing information that may be helpful and important to a child and caregiver, and working to find the best way forward in supporting that child's agency and working together. Thanks, Stephen. Just to touch on culture, culture is a cornerstone of child agency. It shapes the child's identity, parenting styles, a child's understanding of their role in the world. When we're considering and working to support child agency, it's essential to acknowledge and respect the cultural values and beliefs of each child and their family. This helps to ensure that we can create a supportive environment where children can thrive and develop their agency within the context of their unique cultural background. And this is what's going to lead to their best outcomes. This means continuing to work in ways that demonstrate family-centred practice alongside of our work supporting child agency. We need to understand and appreciate this child and family, learning about their cultural background, values and beliefs. We want to work to build trust and rapport, establishing positive relationships, showing genuine curiosity, listening actively, showing empathy. We want to empower families by sharing information and resources about child agency and ensuring that they have opportunities in decision making. We want to work in partnership, working to set goals, implement strategies, and celebrate successes. And with this as the foundation, we're absolutely able to continue to be an advocate for children's rights, ensuring children are respected and that diverse needs are recognised and valued, while recognising that this can happen in a range of different ways, reflecting the individual needs of each child and their family. So just to wrap up, I wanted to flag that this work is not always simple, but it's vitally important in supporting the best long-term outcomes for children. To do this well, in addition to sharing information and working in ways in our visits that support a child's agency, we need to work to understand the needs and values of the individual child and family that we're working with. While there's a lot of science behind these ideas, the implementation, I believe, is more art than science. There isn't a recipe or a one-size-fits-all approach for every child and family we meet. Instead, we're co-creating what this approach looks like for this child and this family and this context. It requires that we approach this intentionally, that we use our clinical skills and our understanding and discussions with children and families to support us in decisions about what needs to be changed or reviewed and how, alongside the changing needs of the child and family, we can continue to build this child's agency together. Thanks, Stephen.
I was going to finish off today's webinar by asking you some questions to drop in the chat. But given where we're at time, I'm wondering whether, rather than putting in responses to this question, I'm wondering whether there's one or two questions that we can respond to before we finish up today.
One morning, I might jump in and ask a quick question. It's Wajma from WA, Mission Australia Partners in the Community. Apologies, I have turned my camera on. Okay, I'm there. Thank you so much, really appreciate it. My question is, we often work in a space where therapists are very time poor. And so what are some of the skills that they will be taking away, or is there anything in this space that they can do to make sure that rapport building is not missed when they are rushed and they've given 10 hours to do this fantastic work, and that's often not enough when it's attached to funding, external, etc. Any suggestions, any thoughts around that will be very much appreciated.
I think that's a great question for us to be thinking about. I think we all feel the pressure of how do we do really high quality work with children and families when there's limitations in terms of the time, the resources that we have to be able to do that. And I think it's about how do you have a quick win in the circumstances that you've got available to you as well. So what's one thing that you might be able to progress? If I'm working with a child and family for 10 minutes, 10 hours over a number of weeks, I'm going to only have so much opportunity to be able to do so much. And so for me, I'd be really wanting to think through what's one thing that I could possibly do to have an impact on promoting this child's agency and supporting them to be a competent and independent practitioner in decision making moving forward. Kylie, would you add anything else to that?
I think you answered wonderfully, Stephen. It's a hard one, isn't it? Really hard. Yeah.
And I can also see that in the chat. That there's a question around the training that we use to upskill staff at Noah's Ark, what that looked like. And I spoke about this briefly earlier on, but I can provide a little bit more detail, is that we started off with an initial webinar that covered a lot of the things that we've spoken about today. What is child agency? Why it's important, and some of the strategies that we've spoken about how do we include the perspectives of children, support them to understand what we're doing while we're working with them. So a lot of what the learning package that we shared with our staff, a lot of what we provided them, we covered in our webinar today. On that note, back to you, Denise.
Yeah, thanks so much, Stephen and Kylie. I have put up the poll, and thank you for those who are doing that, who are completing it. But you have covered such a rich amount of information in a short time frame. So thank you for providing the research, but also providing the practical strategies for people to actually reflect on and use when they're working with families. And I actually love this question that you've put up, Stephen, about what's one thing you'll take into your practice and do more intentionally. I think that is something I'll certainly reflect on and, develop that plan for how do you increase supporting child agency in any work that we do with children. I also think it was great that you covered that challenge of balancing the child and caregiver goals. We certainly heard that in some of the family consultations as well. So look, I would just like to say on behalf of everybody who has attended, there's lots of thank yous in the chat. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us, and we look forward to seeing what the next trials come out with, and how this keeps expanding through the work you're doing at Noah's Ark. So thank you again. Really appreciate your time today.